Today's story, folks, is one of the most shocking stories I've ever heard. Honestly, when I first heard this story, I was stunned and kept asking why. What's the reason behind it? You always want to know the cause in crime stories. In the end, it turned out to be a really weird reason. Anyway, this story took place in Morocco, and a shout out to the people of Morocco in the year 2000, specifically in one of the areas belonging to the city of Khouribga. I really don't know if I pronounced that right or wrong. In this area, a very, very terrible crime happened in 2000. But let's rewind a bit. This story starts with a man and a woman who had been married for several years. And, thank God, they were blessed with 3 daughters and 1 son. The first child, a girl, was perfectly normal, thank God, and didn't have any issues. But the second pregnancy turned out to be twins, and unfortunately, these twin girls had growth problems. Their names were Asma and Somaya. From the moment they opened their eyes to this world, they had a problem. Their bodies were extremely frail. No matter what they did, they were skin and bones, meaning they could be considered special needs. After these twin girls came along, God blessed the couple with a son named Ahmed. Time passed, and the eldest daughter grew up to be around 19 or 20 years old. As we mentioned, the eldest daughter didn't have any problems. A guy came along and asked for her hand in marriage. This person worked in the city of Casablanca, and thankfully, she got married according to the ways of God and His messenger and moved with her husband to Casablanca. Unfortunately, the rest of the family was in really bad financial shape. The father worked in the village at any job he could find, and he had high hopes for his son Ahmed, thinking, if only Ahmed grows up, he'll work and take care of me and might even help out with household expenses. Of course, Ahmed was the youngest, so it would take a while for him to grow up. Over time, both the mother and the father got tired and moved. To the mercy of God Almighty, Ahmed, the little boy, is now around 19 or 20 years old, and the twin girls are older than him. Ahmed and his siblings were living with a farm owner in the same village. They had no land or anything, and the farm owner had given them a small yard in the farm because their father worked for him. When he visited the farm, he saw the financial situation of this family, especially when the 2 girls, whose names are Asma and Samia, started their treatment journey, which unfortunately didn't end well. They were always in need of medications that were really expensive. Of course, Ahmed was working everywhere he could, but he could barely afford food. So, what happened was that the farm owner took pity on them and gave them 2 rooms in the farm to live in. Plus, the villagers knew about Ahmed's father's situation and the girls' issues, so the neighbors started contributing a bit to help each other out to pay for the girls' medicine. Each person contributed whatever they could to help Ahmed's father buy treatments for the girls until they passed away. May God have mercy on them. Ahmed then began to take care of his sisters. As for his married sister, she would come to visit them every now and then. Sometimes for a week, sometimes for 10 days, and sometimes for a month. The twin girls didn't have any issues with speech or thinking. Their minds were fine, but the problem was with their physical bodies. If you saw one of them, there's hardly any flesh. They were almost just skin and bones, with their bodies lacking meat. They didn't leave a single medicine untouched. They brought everything they could get, but unfortunately, there were no notable results. However, with the treatments and medications they were taking, their condition was relatively stable, or we can say somewhat stable. As they grew a bit older, they started going out for walks and chatting with each other, and things were going on this way. Days passed, and Ahmed grew up a little and started to manage. He's been taking care of his siblings, looking after them as much as he can. For them, Ahmed is like a supportive brother and a father figure. Until he turned about 25 or 26, he matured and started thinking, this house we're living in doesn't really belong to us. At the end of the day, the owners of the farm might one day say, sorry, but we want to sell the farm, and the new buyer could tell us, if you don't mind, you need to get out of these 2 rooms. So, he started planning and thinking of finding a solution. He worked hard, putting in day and night shifts, so at least through this work he could buy a piece of land and build a house for himself and his siblings. Of course, Ahmed, thank God, didn't suffer from any birth defects, and he was a very respectable person with a good reputation in the village. He was one of the best young men in the village, and everyone wanted Ahmed to work for them. At one point in his life, Ahmed thought, "Why am I working as a laborer? Why should I go and work for others daily?" So, one day, he decided to learn a trade and start working in that field. He began working in construction, building houses, carrying bricks, and all that. Since childhood, Ahmed loved placing bricks and constructing things, so it was sort of a hobby for him. He started to pursue this hobby, and when you love what you do, you'll excel at it. This kind of work doesn't take long to master because once you learn it, you get the hang of everything. That's what happened with Ahmed. Within a year or two, he became a first-rate construction master and started working, and everything improved for him. His financial situation turned out to be relatively stable. However, Ahmed was still struggling with the costs of his siblings' medications, and the villagers continued to help him. Each one contributed what they could, and in the end, Ahmed was able to buy the medicines for his siblings, showing care towards them as the days went by. For about a year or two, Ahmed started working in the village and also in the neighboring village. He was building a house here and a kitchen there. Sometimes someone would come and say, "With all due respect, would you make me a bathroom or something in this place?" He managed to save up some money and, thankfully, on that day, he bought a piece of land that was about 300 to 400 square meters. After a while, he gathered enough money to build 2 rooms, a kitchen, and a bathroom, which meant he actually constructed a modest house in this village. At that time, Ahmed was around 29 or 28, almost hitting 30. Even up to this moment, Ahmed hasn't married. He's busy with his sisters and work. He wants to try to create good opportunities for his sisters, so, thankfully, now he has land and a simple house. Then Ahmed started thinking about marriage, saying, "Why not get married now that I have a house?" His sisters were living in the farmhouse, and this piece of land he bought was only about 25 to 30 meters away, basically right next door. As you know, houses and land in villages are usually close together, and everyone builds on their land without any planning. Plus, Ahmed specifically intended to buy this land close to where they were living. He said to himself, "Let me get married, and we'll see what happens if the owners of the farm ask us to leave. It won't be a problem since I'll have my own house ready to move my sisters into." And that's exactly what happened. Ahmed got engaged to one of the village girls, and he married her according to the sunnah of Allah and His Messenger. The girl's name is Zara, and she comes from a very simple family, just like Ahmed's. Upon hearing about Ahmed, the girl's family had no objections, and everything went smoothly, better than anyone expected, without any issues. From the very beginning, Ahmed's condition for his wife when he got engaged was that he had sisters who couldn't cook, couldn't do anything, and couldn't even wash. He cleans up because he was doing all the housework completely. The girls, of course, can't do anything. It's not that they don't want to, their bodies just can't handle it, and standing for long might cause them problems, Like if one of them walks and falls hard, she could break something, her hand, her hip, God forbid, or her spine, or any part of her body could be at risk of breaking. So, Ahmed wouldn't let his sisters work or cook or do anything, except maybe a few simple tasks. That's why he insisted that his wife keep an eye on his sisters as much as possible. This wife, Zara, didn't have any problem with that and said, "These sisters of yours are simple girls, and they're not troublemakers. Most of their time, they just stay in this house. They don't go out or come and go." And indeed, things went on like that. From the moment Zara got married, she lived with her husband in the new house that Ahmed built. Ahmed would leave for work in the morning and wouldn't return until after sunset. Sometimes he had work nearby in the village where he lived, so he would visit his sisters at noon or in the afternoon or any time and bring them whatever he could find along the way. Besides that, Zara wouldn't fall short. She would bring them breakfast and give it to them, and then she'd make lunch and dinner for them. She wasn't slacking off with those sisters and was fulfilling her duties to the best of her ability. When the girls saw that, they realized that this sister-in-law is the one bringing food and helping them out, whether it's with laundry or anything else. So, little by little, they started depending on themselves. They didn't want to burden her. Even some women from the village would come and help with Asma and Sumaya, meaning the whole village's hearts were with them since Asma and Sumaya are special needs children. Some women, thankfully, would wash their clothes or bring them food or whatever they understood they needed. And those girls, Asma and Sumaya, were living their lives this way, while their older sister, as I mentioned, would visit. Every now and then, they would check in on what those two girls needed or what was missing, and Ahmed's sister would always remind her brother Ahmed and his wife about them. Time passed, and it was around the year 2000 when the owner of the farm that gave Ahmed and his siblings those 2 rooms asked them, within a few months, to vacate the rooms since he needed the men who worked on the farm. Ahmed said he had no problem with that because he worked the land and built the house he was living in now, keeping in mind that one day they might come and ask him to leave the house or those 2 rooms. So he didn't have any issue with that, and he informed his siblings, as well as his older sister, about the situation. The older sister was aware, but what happened with Ahmed during that time in 2000 was that he saw the construction work wasn't bringing in enough money anymore. Some days there would be work, and other days, 3 or 4 weeks would pass without any work. It seemed like jobs were becoming scarce, and he couldn't keep up with the expenses of his wife and siblings. Ahmed, mashallah, now had 2 daughters and a son. The older girl at that time was around 7 or 8 years old, and his siblings also needed medication, so the expenses piled up, even though he was trying to support them. The villagers also helped them cover the costs of the medications, which were very expensive. As work became scarce, Ahmed would work one day and then have off for days without any jobs or anything. One day, his sister came from Casablanca with her husband to visit, saying, "So, what's the news? What's going on with you guys?" Ahmed replied, "Honestly, you can see for yourself, the work has dried up, and I'm barely managing to cover the kids' expenses and the food and drinks." So, he asked, "If you happen to see a job either here or there, can you help me out? I mean, in Casablanca, any job at a company, even as a guard, would be great. I want to work any regular job, but the most important thing is to have a stable salary. I want to know that I will have a paycheck at the end of the month." He told me, "Don't worry, I have a friend who works at one of the companies. I might be able to get you a job there." And really, about a week later, he called him and said, "Come to Casablanca. I found you a job as an employee at one of the companies." Ahmad couldn't believe the news, and he moved to Casablanca, got hired at one of the companies, and as a result, he had to stay a whole week at the company and could only come home on weekends. Things went on like this for a while. One day, Zara, Ahmed's wife, was preparing breakfast and heading to Ahmed's sister's house. Of course, Ahmed's sister still hadn't left the farm, but they had an extension. He went to the farm and told them, "In a few months, I need to figure out what to do with the farm, and I need the 2 rooms." So they were still in that room. She brought breakfast. She really didn't hold back, preparing breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That day, while she was heading to the 2 rooms, as soon as she opened the door, she found the twin girls in a terrible and really horrifying state, a crime by any standards. The girls were severely battered. Zara put the breakfast aside and started to scream right away. The villagers heard Zara's shouts from the morning. My goodness, the noise was so alarming. When the villagers rushed over, they found the girls in bad shape, clearly having been beaten with a blunt object. You know, we're talking about a blunt tool, not something sharp. For example, let's say a metal rod. Do you understand what I mean? A metal rod or something wooden, They were in that kind of condition. The sight of the girls was so bad it could break a stone. They had no energy to defend themselves. Their bodies were just too weak. I'm telling you, it was skin and bones. Can you imagine how they looked? Honestly, picture this with me. The girls didn't have any cheeks or anything, you know? Their ribcage was so visible on their bodies because they were so much skin on bones. You could see every bone in them. When you looked at them, it was unfortunate that blood was coming from their heads, legs, backs, and bellies, and it looked like they'd been brutally beaten. People reported this to the security forces, and of course, the news spread throughout the whole village. The main point is that Zara was devastated by this horrific sight. It was something that could make stone weep. Plus, her eldest daughter had come with her and witnessed her aunts right before her eyes. The locals gathered, and forensic medicine, along with criminal evidence and investigative teams, came in. Chaos ensued as they began to uncover evidence at the crime scene. They found out that these girls had been beaten with a tool, as I mentioned, and according to forensic evaluations and criminal investigations, it was determined that this tool was likely used for bending or forging metal rods. The marks from this tool were visible on the victims' heads and bodies. Can you imagine when a tool leaves a mark on a human body? I mean, it meant that the blow was strong, or that the human body was extremely weak. Since the girls had nothing but skin and bones, the signs of the beating were quite obvious, and the crime was horrifying and brutal, really extreme. Then the villagers started to gather, asking their neighbors and anyone from nearby villages about these girls and what their situation was. They said, well, these girls are special needs, and that they had a brother who worked in one of the companies in Casablanca. Also, this Zara is Ahmed's wife. She was, of course, devastated and crying over her child. Alright, Zara, what happened? What's going on? She said, honestly, I was going to bring them breakfast in the morning. So when I came in the morning, I opened the door, which was just a wooden door, and anyone could just come in and unlock it easily. The moment I stepped inside, I saw this sight right in front of me. The security personnel, I swear, the words of the wife, she was right. He really did bring breakfast, and the breakfast was set aside. They asked, so what happened the day before? When did you see them last? She said she saw them last at night. She brought them dinner, and they had dinner, then she returned home. She even told them in detail that she brought them this and that, but Zara noticed that there was a plate with fried eggs and said, guys, this fried egg isn't something I brought them yesterday. So maybe the person who killed them is the one who brought them that egg. Anyway, during the interrogation and the initial look at the crime scene, it became clear that these girls had no money, so whoever killed them likely intended to steal. So why did they kill them? What's the reason? They are now waiting for the forensic report and the autopsy to see if the girls were subjected to violations, God forbid, or rape. Everything is possible. I don't know what's going on, but the forensic team pointed out that the girls showed some signs of poisoning. So they kept the food found at the crime scene, especially the fried egg that Zara mentioned, saying, I swear I didn't bring that fried egg. They took that fried egg and the other materials to the lab for examination to find out what happened to the girls, and they also took the bodies to the coroner's office to understand what happened to them. Of course, they called their brother Ahmed, and he showed up right away, along with the married sister. When Ahmed arrived and saw his sisters in that condition, honestly, it was a really hard sight. Who would want to commit such a crime against these two poor girls, who were around 41 or 42 years old at the time? The entire village mourned them deeply, especially since these two girls were very kind, and everyone cared for them, bringing them food and doing laundry for them. In addition, Zara, the wife, and the older brother and sister, everyone was concerned about them. It was morning when news broke about the murder of these two girls when Ahmed and his older sister came. What happened? Do the girls have any problems, Ahmed? Has something happened to them? He said, man, these girls are just stuck at home. They hardly ever go out or come back in. They barely walk around the house and then come back home where they're living. They just step out a little around the house, touch the wall and come back. They don't meet anyone, talk to anyone, or do anything. Of course, During the questioning of Ahmed and his sister, they responded by saying they got news from the farm owner that we need to hand over the house in the next 3 to 4 months. The time hasn't come yet for us to hand over the house, and the older sister said, I had agreed with Ahmed that if this happens, I would take one of my sisters, either Asma or Samaya, and keep her with me in Casablanca to take care of her. The other one would stay at Ahmed's house. She even told Ahmed that she wouldn't mind if both of her sisters came to the house, and she would look after them. In the end, the security guys started investigating and searching, hoping to find a clue or a hint that could lead them to the killer and the perpetrator of this horrific crime, but unfortunately, there was no significant result. They didn't find any trace of the killer or the criminal, and it seems like this killer calculated everything down to the last detail. However, the security focused on the issue of the eggs, or the plate of eggs that Zara said she didn't bring them at night. Importantly, here comes the forensic report saying that the girls had fractures in various bones in their bodies. Their knees, legs, arms, forearms, the back of their heads, shoulders, ribs, and spine. I mean, these girls were beat up really badly. Whoever killed them definitely did it out of hatred. Like serious hatred. So what's the reason? What's going on? What could be the motives for killing these two girls? Why commit such a crime? It's a shame. They also confirmed here with the forensic report that the girls hadn't been assaulted or molested or anything, and the girls had nothing stolen from them, just the clothes they were wearing and a few items. The house really isn't worth all these objects being stolen, so the crime was mysterious and strange. The security guys faced a very complicated case. They called in the farm owners, who said, "We did warn you once and told you that within 3 or 4 months, you should hand over the house because we want to sell the farm." So it turned out that they had nothing to do with this story. In the village, there's no one suspicious who could commit this crime, and the security personnel haven't reached any conclusion yet. The only thing they are focusing on is that plate of eggs, which had some kind of poison, and there was an attempt to poison the girls. However, the main cause of death was the severe bleeding from being hit on the back of the head. Of course, the skulls of both girls were severely fractured. So as I said, the security people haven't arrived at any results yet, but investigations are still ongoing. What happened is that Ahmad is deeply saddened by his sister's deaths, questioning why their end had to be this way, so terrible. Ahmad started thinking about who would benefit from killing his sisters, and those thoughts kept swirling in his head. His eldest daughter, who's about 8 or 9 years old, was there with him. It seems that his wife, Zara, was outside the house working on something. She said, "Dad, the night before my aunts passed away, my mom went to my sisters at night and took them a plate of eggs. After she delivered the eggs, she came back home." Ahmad was listening to this. Of course, in Ahmed's house, there's a small room he built to store his construction tools, which he used when working. The girl continued, saying, "After Mom delivered the eggs and came back, I went with her to the storage room that Ahmad built, where he kept his tools, and I was holding a flashlight for her. She entered the room and took with her a metal tool, which is what she used for bending the iron." Ahmed was hearing things from his daughter, and according to what she said, he had no idea about the plate incident or the poisoning because his wife told the security guys that he didn't bring the plate of eggs. He didn't know anything about that plate, and she was saying, "What are you talking about, sweetie?" She replied, "Yeah, Dad, I went with her, and I even said I wanted to go to my aunt's place, but she told me to stay here and didn't let me go with her." She was a bit upset but then came back. As soon as Ahmed heard what his daughter said, he went straight to the police. At the police station, where they were handling this case, they welcomed Ahmed. He said, "Peace be upon you," and they replied, "And upon you peace." He brought his daughter with him at that time and told them he had new information that could help in the investigation. They asked, "What do you have?" He said, "This girl is going to tell you what happened." So the girl started talking, saying, "Honestly, this happened and that happened, and my mom brought them the eggs and then went to the warehouse, grabbed the iron stick, and came back to them. She didn't let me go with her. Are you sure about what happened? They asked her, and she replied that she was indeed sure, describing everything in detail. According to what the forensic evidence and medical examination showed, the tool used to hit the girls was a blunt object, and it turned out to be another iron object. Here, the security guys kept asking her the same questions multiple times, and she repeated her statements. They went straight to the warehouse by Ahmed's house to check if the tool was still there or not, and they found the iron tool. The police were about to give the body back to Ahmed for burial, but now there were new developments in this crime. They began to compare the marks from the blows with the iron piece and found out that this was the iron piece used to hit the girls and was the same tool used in the murder. They quickly arrested Zara and confronted her with her daughter, saying, "Your daughter says this and that." Zara immediately denied everything, claiming, "That girl is not sane. That girl? I know how it went." The girl immediately responded and said, "No, Mom, you were the one who made the eggs and went to Auntie's house. Then I came back home and you asked me to help you with the flashlight. I held the flashlight for you, and you took a piece of iron with you or the tool for bending the iron. I told you back then that I wanted to go to Auntie's house, but you wouldn't let me go. You said, 'No, stay at home.' Then Zara said, 'Okay, ask the other kids, ask my other kids.' The girl immediately responded and said, 'My brothers were actually sleeping. The time was around 10 or 11, something like that. And at that time, I wasn't sleepy.' The girl keeps admitting, saying that she meant well. She didn't mean to get her mom into trouble. It was as if God was speaking the truth through the girl. She was sitting with her dad, and she told the story herself. So here, the security men started questioning Zara, saying, 'Zara, listen, all this dodging isn't going to help you. Speak up, admitting it won't hurt you.' She said, 'Actually, the plate with the eggs isn't ours.' 'Did you ever see the plate with the eggs, Ahmad? Have you ever seen it at our house?' He replied, 'Honestly, I've never seen it. But the girl is saying things that are different from what you're saying.' 'What are you saying, Zara? You have to confess.' They started putting pressure on Zara. Zertok, you know. After a lot of intense pressure on Zara, she finally confessed to the horrific crime she committed against those poor girls who had done nothing wrong and killed them in a very terrible way. At first, Zara's confessions were that those girls were the cause of problems between Ahmad and Zara. She said, "Right away, Ahmad and I had problems, and the reason was that his sisters were inciting him against me. These problems escalated to the point where I had to go to my family's house, and his sisters told him to divorce me and not take me back. I don't know how, and not to pay attention to me and to marry someone else. But of course, this is definitely not convincing because when Ahmad was asked, he said, 'My sisters have no problems with my wife at all. And honestly, between me and my wife Zara, there are no problems. If there are any problems, they are just normal issues that happen in any family. Everything was under control, and my wife's words weren't accurate. My sisters never told me to divorce her.' Those security guys were like, 'Hey, Zara, speak up and tell the truth.' She said, 'These are the reason for my misery and problems with my husband.' But then, after a lot of pressure from the security, she confessed the real reason. She said, 'You know that day when we got the news from the farm owners that they wanted to vacate the house in 3 to 4 months? I thought that Asma and Samia would come and live in our house, or that Ahmed would at least rent them a place for themselves. So, Ahmed would have issues covering our food and drinks, and if he rented a place for them, it would lighten the expenses on us. He couldn't fulfill our needs, and I'd be stuck taking care of them for my whole life. What happened was their older sister, who was married, visited them 2 days before their murder. She brought them some clothes and food, saying, 'If the house gets handed over, you can come live with me.' Zara heard this story on the night of the murder. On that day, after she heard the story from the older sister, she went back to Casablanca. So, that day, she made dinner. Sorry, the night before they were murdered. She made dinner for herself and her son and sat with Ahmed's sisters, Asma and Samia. She said to them, "Why don't you go to your older sister?" They replied, No, we don't want to go." I have no idea why they were so adamant about not wanting to go to their older sisters. They didn't want to be a burden on her husband and increase her responsibilities more than necessary. They wanted to stay close to their brother, trying to support him. Zara kept insisting, "Go to your sister. She wants you there. You should give your brother a break from the extra expenses." They told her, "Mind your own business. We want to stay with our brother Ahmed." They said, "How can you expect us to leave our brother? We simply can't be apart from him. The hospital where we go for treatment is close to our area, and if my sister and I go there, how will we get back and forth to the hospital? It'll be a new environment. You, Zara, have nothing to do with this matter." Based on this, an argument broke out between them. The next day, Zara went and brought them dinner, then came back and got the plate of eggs she was planning to use for poisoning. She had borrowed this plate from one of the neighbors, so when Ahmed saw the plate, he didn't recognize it. She put the poison in this plate and then came back, saying that maybe this poison wouldn't do anything to them and wouldn't kill them. So she called her daughter, grabbed the iron rod, and went in on them at night, attacking them like crazy. She kept hitting them until she broke them and there wasn't a single bone left intact. After she made sure she killed them, she went back home and returned the rod to its place as if she hadn't done anything. But she didn't realize that the girl could understand and testify against her, and she didn't expect that the girl would talk to her father or tell anyone about what happened. In the end, the truth had to come out, and that's what happened. The truth was revealed, thank God, through her daughter's words. After the confessions and the reenactment of the horrific crime, which was a shock to the village residents and a shock to Ahmed and his older sister, the news spread, and Zara was brought to trial. After several sessions and trials, Zara was sentenced to death by hanging, but the death penalty is on hold in Morocco, so Zara will spend her life in prison. We've reached the end of the story, folks. I hope you enjoyed the narrative and all these things, so don't hold back on your support. May God make you happy so we can keep going. Just let's say good support, and see you in other videos.